Consumers can't seem to get enough protein. The focus on high protein diets started in those shadowy niches of sports nutrition and weight management, but now there's increasingly diverse consumer cohorts that possess a heightened awareness around the value of this essential nutrient. And it's that demographic diversity, being interested for different reasons, making protein a battleground category as it proliferates across the entire grocery store. So it's difficult not being fascinated by the evolving marketplace, which is why Senior Market Insights Director at Spin, Scott Dicker, and I decided to tackle all things protein in our newest quarterly functional CPG categorical deep dive. Beyond providing some current subcategory retail sales status snippets, we describe several driving forces impacting comparable results, including how a growing variety of protein input sources, taste profiles, and form factors can cannibalize and or provide incrementality to those mainstay high protein offerings. Also, Scott and I cover some adjacent marketplace dynamics like the growing GLP-1 utilization that could create new demand for protein products that kick off the next plus phase of the space. Additionally, we explain why the consumer search for more protein should force retail merchandising opportunities to grow in the near term future. But these are just some of the intriguing topics we chatted about in this episode. So, without further delay, here is the recent conversation I had with my good friend, Scott Dicker. So, as Scott and I were sharing, I think, a BevNet magazine article that we were both quoted in, I think this realization hit that we, for whatever reason, I don't know how we ever missed this on our quarterly kind of jam sessions, but we never have kind of solely focused on the protein category, which we're changing that now. But Scott, as always, thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to join me.
Protein, it's like such a staple of every category now that I think we often overlook it. But it's as relevant and important now as ever, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the current events that are driving it. But I'm happy to be here and always happy to talk about protein.
Yeah, it seems like every item at this point across the grocery store is like protein this or whatever it is. It's like the big joke around here. It's like you can rarely even get anything that hasn't been like this like proteinification of the the category. But it's like, and maybe that has a little bit of a effect on a lot of different things, because you no longer have to kind of even search out your protein items, I guess, in a way, because you are getting like trace amounts all over the place. And I'm sure a lot of people don't necessarily count their protein like they are like some bodybuilder or something like that. But it is interesting that everything at this point likes to call out the macronutrient. And maybe that's because it's never really gotten the hate of a lot of the other ones. And, we could probably go in so many different directions with this. And we're going to try to cover a ton of different formats and a ton of different protein input sources and things like that. So let's just start, since I mentioned bodybuilders and mentioning like the sports nutrition, performance nutrition, active nutrition, that whole sense. Let's start with powders, because I think that that's maybe a good starting point. I don't know if you're able to kind of pull any different pieces of data, but I want to try to get a little bit of like a broad conversation going on the powder side, and then just different inputs or things that we're seeing on that side.
Protein powder, it's a category I really love. And I think, just building off of what you said, it's so impressive that there continues to be gains in protein powder, despite there being protein enhanced products in every aisle. And just real quick, if you had to think in 10 seconds, can you name a single category in the grocery store that doesn't have a protein added brand disrupted? Maybe condiments? Maybe.
Yeah, maybe condiments, right? Or like
something
just
like
fresh fruit or something. I don't know.
Or produce.
Yeah.
But like outside of it, but like produce, it kind of falls in that perimeter where like the majority of protein falls. So despite you being literally able to choose your vehicle for protein powders, which was like the OG added protein, continues to do well. And so we see in a combined MULO plus natural plus convenience, it's up 5% year over year as a total. It's up double digits on Amazon, I believe, as well. And so this is a category, people are still interested in it. And so in a few ways, there's that traditional, I need my immediate immediately after I finish my last set, I need to be drinking my protein shake and just, throw it in your shaker. But then there's also, a proliferation of like baking with it, mixing, adding it to your morning smoothie, the general wellness consumer. I know I sound like a broken record on this, but it's no longer thought of that like you're going to get bulky from having protein shakes. So that's introduced women, aging populations, just for lack of a better term, meathead type of consumers. And so we're still seeing that proliferation of consumers on that. It's really benefited, to your point, like there's fat free, there's sugar free, there's carb free. No one's ever really benefited, from marketing protein free. And so you're seeing that, and I know you wanted to get some numbers on it. So I did want to say whey protein continues to have its, I don't want to say comeback because it never really went away, but it wasn't always the top growth ingredient or source. It is the top in both in terms of volume as well as growth percentage, both online and in store, growing at over 15% in store, over 20% online right now. And then something I always want to point out because it surprises me is that collagen is actually the number 2 source.
Yeah.
Over plant-based in both online and in store. It is kind of leveling off growth. Finally, we saw a lot of years of really high growth. It is leveling off. It's under 5% growth in both in store about 2%, online about 4%, and then plant proteins actually decreasing in store a little bit, still growing pretty healthy online. But then the call out for that is pea protein is still growing 8% in store, 5% online.
Yeah, you brought up a kind of a point that I think I've always drawn myself to, or just of interest, is that collagen is the number 2. I think that it's so wild to think that, it's above plant. And it's, I think, substantially above plant in terms of share. And maybe that's because of the intersections that it has and the attractiveness that it's become across, more the beauty category, and a lot of females kind of taking it for something that's beyond, the actual maybe protein source of that. I do also think there's an interesting, maybe, added element. And I know we've briefly maybe mentioned this in a previous episode of like some of these ingredients that used to be popular and then all of a sudden, fell out of the limelight. And then now, maybe 10 or 15 years later, they become popular again, which is colostrum. I think something like that has this kind of similarity, or maybe, synergistic elements with collagen, and maybe you're going to see some more of that being kind of intermixed together, and maybe that helps collagen, and maybe it kind of brings some more excitement to all that. Like I think that, you also mentioned, with plant-based, it's interesting because I think that the pea protein side of things, there's been some, different trade economic things going on there. That could cause some potential pricing, fluctuations and things with US brands. You also have, the opposite of that is like the protein technology, or I guess the crop is getting better with plant-based. That's making the actual product better. I would argue, like, it has a better mouthfeel. It has better attributes. And I think just product developers have done a much better job at understanding how to create a overall product that mimics or has a similar kind of feel to what we would consider with milk and things like that, with different, things within the flavor systems and like emulsifiers and things like that. I'm always surprised that it doesn't grow quicker than that. And that's maybe because people take a considerable amount of time before they cycle back into something. Maybe they've tried, a quote unquote, not so good plant-based product. And then they go, hey, I tried it. It's not for me. I'm going to go back to doing what I normally do. And that's not if they have, dietary restrictions or something like that. They're just making the choice on their own. maybe it takes them a couple years before they come back to it. And maybe that's that second repeat cycle. And maybe plant is in this weird section here where it's not necessarily getting, the growth there. But I do think if we look at this long term, it's one of those categories that you're probably going to see small incremental growth over long periods of time that we look back and it's going to, look very impressive, but it's not going to be something that's, ultimately going to jump off the page again, like it did a few years ago. And maybe that's what I was kind of mentioning with that cycle around where like eventually we're going to come back to it again, where people are going to give it another chance. They just maybe haven't gotten to that point yet.
And there's also, a number of people who are looking to reduce their dairy intake, just in general. And so it's not that they're necessarily looking for something that plant-based, but it can remove kind of a veto of it. And so I think, the long term, to your point, I think the long term prognosis of plant protein is high. I don't think we're going to see that, huge growth that we had seen a couple of years ago for it. But to your point, it's going to act like a more mature category. And then, just one more thing, collagen always surprises me. I always thought this was going to be, do you remember because they used to advertise like collagen protein in a protein powder they used to call beef protein. You remember that? I think it was like Carnivore was the brand, the big brand that was doing it. And like it was done like that. They almost like hid that it was collagen because people like didn't want to take collagen because they thought it was like an inferior protein. And so that was always the lens that I looked at, like, is it going to be a big thing? But then you have to think people aren't taking it for like muscle building and, recovery necessarily. They're taking it for, joints, beauty from within, and skin, things like that. And so there's like it's a different audience, and people are comfortable with the protein powder as well. So I think there's room for all of these to continue to grow. Protein, we just mentioned it, but protein has had, it continues to have a health halo. It allows people also to indulge. If they like eating pancakes, but pancakes is a junk food, throw a scoop of protein in your mix. Now it's a health food for you. Same thing with all your baked goods. I personally, I throw protein in my oatmeal most mornings, and it turns a high carb meal into high protein. And so that's why protein powder is so versatile, and it's going to continue, including, we spent a lot of time talking about not the core user hardcore, like that, like gym crowd, but including for the gym crowd, the products are getting better. And so it's going to be interesting to see where it goes, but I think every indication is that it's going to continue to grow at a more steady, mature category basis.
What's your feeling on, just before we kind of transition into a different format, on some of the clear proteins? Because I think it's not necessarily that these things are new, and maybe that's some of the argument for people. I think that the overall, I always use the word like technology, because I think a lot of this stuff is, food tech when it comes down to it, like just the ability to process and make this stuff much better and understand the product at the most minute level, is that allows the development of products to become much better. And I've tasted a lot of the more recent clear proteins, and they do a much better job at kind of offsetting some of what would be the things that consumers wouldn't like about it. Maybe that mouthfeel, that kind of like film that builds up with some of the original ones. So I'm interested if you've tried some of the more recent ones. I know there's a ton of brands that seem to be launching them or will be launching them. It seems to be the hot thing right now. And I think it's partly because, one, the flavor profiles that you could probably create with that are much more dynamic or much more, interesting, refreshing. Maybe it has a different play across. If you look at a seasonal element of it, maybe there's some play there or whatever. I do think, it also kind of moves into when we talk about ready to drink and things like that. Maybe there's some additional opportunities, but just wanted to hear your kind of take on if you've tried any of the more recent clear proteins.
I have tried many of them. Not my favorite. I prefer a good old fashioned regular whey protein, or plant-based for that matter. I think there's a market for it. The people, to your point, who don't like some of that mouthfeel from the whey, and they're able to do flavors that really don't work for, some more of those like fruity flavors, and less like decadent dessert. No, not just your chocolate, vanilla, cookies and cream, and obviously all the derivatives of those. Man, maybe it's just like what I'm used to, but it feels weird to have a fruity flavored protein. I like the chocolate and like kind of that creamy feel of it. And so, um, again, I think there's a market for it. I won't see it overtaking any of those main ones anytime soon, but it's definitely something out there. Kind of reminds me. Do you remember like when Native Whey
Yeah.
was big for a while? And so like there's a market for some of these different types, and I feel the same way about the individual plant proteins. Uh, but I don't think like any one of them is going to like overtake like the plant combo. So think about like the plant-based milk, how there's always a new one coming. I've realized that they can milk up just about anything. There's every nut, every grain, and so it'll lift the entire category because the people who don't like the current offerings might enter. I don't I don't anticipate there being a whole lot of shifting though. Although that's just my personal perspective on the clear way.
So let's move formats. Let's talk bars, because I think the last handful of years have been a pretty interesting up and down for the category, because
Yep.
it went from, pre great shutdown, where it was like the hottest thing in the world, where everybody and their mother wanted a protein bar brand. They were buying them, like left and right. And then,
Yep.
2020 hits and consumer mobility goes to nowhere. And all of a sudden the bars value proposition went to not very attractive anymore. And the category struggled for a handful of years. And then now, over the last probably year or so, it's done considerably well. I think the last numbers I saw, and I know that the high protein side of it is maybe growing a little bit less than the overall nutritional bars category, but I think it's somewhere around 7-ish% or so that I think I saw. And like, that's, you think about the landscape of the grocery categories right now, that's great. That's doing extremely well. So it's outperforming the broader grocery categories. And I think it's all of a sudden the excitement around protein bars seems to be coming back. You have a lot of brands that are going up for sale, or rumored to be going up for sale. You have bar brands that seem to be kind of newer ones coming out that seem to be pretty interesting. You have even some of the bigger ones that seem to be spending a lot more time on innovation. If it's flavor innovation, with like Hershey's coming out with like a Reese's version with their one bars that they bought a few years ago, that seemed like they were just giving up on it, but now all of a sudden they're spending a lot more time on it.
Yep.
And Quest, I think, even mentioned the other day that they're again going to improve their bar, even though I think it's considerably better than the one that was a handful of years ago. It just seems like all of a sudden bars have become exciting and interesting again, where they were left for dead a few years ago.
And Quest is a great example. They were really ahead of the game, and they continue. They've really evolved to be a protein company, not just the Quest bar. And so I think they're a great example. Protein bars in general, they're the core on the go nutrition for people to grow. And you see, similar to what we said about protein powders, how it's impressive that they continue to show any growth at all given the proliferation of protein. The same can be said about bars, and especially where what we're talking about, almost two different things. We're talking about like the wellness bars, which Quest obviously falls into, uh, and then there's also like all the breakfast bars and things like that that have protein added versions. And the difference is normally those ones have about 8 to 12 grams of protein, and then the kind of wellness bars can be much higher, typically having between 18 and 25. And so consumers are looking for it. There's kind of a few ways to go about it. Some of them are looking for like they're taking that step to saying we don't want like that added protein supplement, for lack of a better term, added to it, and they want it, coming from natural whole food sources. Those typically, though, you'll have slightly less protein, slightly higher calories on them. So it's a different type of consumer that way. You see plant proteins are doing okay in that as well. But protein bars, on the go, you mentioned, they were one of the few categories, really, like, a lot of the categories we talk about, ready to drink stuff and, on the go nutrition, that really suffered during 2020 because people weren't leaving their homes. They didn't need anything on the go. And, big bounce back. They're also, benefiting from the health halo, although you can make, a big argument that many of the bars out there are candy bars with a scoop of protein in them. Just like what I said about pancakes, a candy bar with a scoop of protein is apparently healthy for you, according to a lot of consumer perception. But then there are people who are, reducing sugar in there, again, using whole food sources, having high protein for satiety. So there's such a wide range now, and they've come such a long way from taste. Every few years, I feel like it's at a different level. And just on a personal note, I travel a decent amount of days, and I am on protein bars on the road, and at the airport, at the grocery stores, these are like staples of so many people's who are trying to eat healthy when they're on the go, whether it's work travel or just on the go throughout the day. That it's an important category. I think there's still room to make them healthier, less candy bar-y, although people do enjoy the taste of it. It's that indulgence as well.
What's your go-to if it's available?
I do like Quest Bar, and I still like the old school cookies and cream or cookie dough. I know they've had a million flavors since then. There's also, what I used to like a lot, and I don't see them around, but remember those Zone bars, the Zone Perfect bars?
Mm.
Those used to be good. I like the s'mores flavor for that. The One bars are good. There's a ton of good protein bars. Power Crunch, I think, is a unique format. You don't see a lot of the like wafer. So I pick those up pretty frequently as well. And so I don't know. What's your go-to?
Yeah, I think because I've had so many of them over the years, I definitely think the textural kind of mix up helps sometimes. So I will tend to grab like a Power Crunch bar because I do like that. I also like a lot of the Bear Bells products. I think those are good. I still, enjoy some of the kind of like peanut butter based ones. I think those are good to kind of switch it up as well. And then, one of the bars that I don't pick up too often, but when I'm in like a random convenience store, maybe on a road trip, and I go down the aisle and I'll pick up because for some reason, maybe it's nostalgic or whatever, I'll pick up one of those like big 100 metrics bars that are like
those are still around.
Yeah, they're a lot in the convenience stores, but I like the apple pie, and there's like one with like pretzels or whatever, and literally talk about what you were mentioning before with like terrible macros, which just
it's like 500 calories.
It's so
edit
bad.
It out if I'm exaggerating there. I thought it was like 500 calories if I remember correctly.
I don't remember, but it's terrible. Yeah. It's literally you're better off probably having grabbing a protein shake there and then like eating 2 Reese cups probably. But it's like, hey, sometimes
do you like all like the protein packed like Reese's cups? Well, not Reese's. I should not say peanut butter cups. And all the other like candy formats, that a lot of these brands have come up with. Do you ever swap off out of a bar for one of those?
Yeah, I think when the peanut butter cups came from Quest, the newest version, I did buy those several times because I thought they were really, really good. I think they were leaps and bounds better than the original version. People probably don't remember those because they were, I forget what they called them, carb conscious, or they had some kind of keto cups or something like that, but they were not good. But the newer version is extremely good. I don't think that this is maybe a secret, but Hershey's, I think, is working on something similar to that as well with one. And if that comes out and has any kind of closeness to the actual Reese cups, then that should be interesting for people to try. But I think, and this maybe rolls into a good next step of our conversation, but like, there's the bars, and then on the other side of the ready to eat, there's the more sweet baked good versions. And you talked about even like pancakes and all that kind of stuff. I think it's like protein added, high protein, whatever. If it's brownies, there's those like toaster pastries from like Legendary. That's pretty good. There's like oatmeal cream pies, and I can't remember the name of that brand now. It's Redefined, maybe. It was called
Little
something else
Debbie?
before.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I'd love a protein Little Debbie. If somebody wants to create that. I think Rise has the licensing deal with Little Debbie, so maybe they come out with something like that. But
there you go. That one's for free, right, Josh?
Yeah, that one was for free. Yeah, so Nick, Stella, that one was for free. So, but yeah, I think even on and that's the sweet side. I think that's the one where people make swaps. I would argue probably much. There's probably a lot more switching between bars and those types of items if it's in a snacking format, if it's a cookie or a brownie or a toaster pastry or whatever those things are. I mean, I think those get swapped a lot, and you see them merchandised in a lot of places now. I don't think you have to go out and search for them too often anymore. Like if you go to a 7-Eleven, or if you go to grocery stores or anything like that, there's typically a ton of those things there. So it's easy to kind of make those swaps. And then there's the savory, salty side, which then I think is that it's in its own world. That's in its own kind of spectrum where like that's incremental. That's something where people are maybe even swapping from conventional things like Quest chips and a number of other products that are kind of in that similar vein. But like Quest chips has been the one that far and away has been proven that it has the power. I think it's somewhere around $250 million at this point on a run rate. So it's one of these things where it's a powerful format of these high protein kind of savory, salty snacks items where you don't see a lot of those really at that level yet.
One of the easiest ways to spot an opportunity for innovation is to go into a high carb category, see if there's a player that's doing it right by adding a high protein, and if not, like there's an easy opportunity for innovation. So chips you mentioned, toaster pastries, cookies. Obviously, Lenny and Larry's hit really changed everything. Probably a decade ago now, maybe more. I know they've been around for a long time before that. But that's really when that protein cookie took off, and those are absolutely a direct competition for the protein bar, not an Oreo cookie, or list your other single serve cookie that's not protein enhanced. And so there's two things to take away, and I know I said it before, but one, that people want protein, they can't get enough of it right now, and then two, it's that people still want to indulge. They want these indulgent foods. They don't want to be on a very strict diet. And so any of these kind of permissible indulgences that are these decadent categories or salty snack categories, to your point about the chips, we can also talk about meat snacks as well, because that plays a role. But by adding the functional ingredient protein in this case, it gives people permission to come back into these indulgent categories. And so more so, I know a lot of people don't like protein bars for whatever reason. They either think they have that old view of them as to being like too chalky, or they think that it's just for people trying to bulk up. But if you put it in your toaster pastry, and they love Pop-Tarts growing up, this is like a reason to come back into the category. So it's really additive to the category. And people are switching back and forth. So those two things, this like never-ending desire for more protein, and this idea of permissible indulgences, are really elevating that whole aspect up. And I did just want to make a quick point. When we're talking about protein in general, things like jerky are seeing innovation. Cleaner label on the jerky. That's like one of the core savory, high protein, low carb categories, and so that's something to keep a lookout for in direct competition. And then I can't say it enough. We're talking about all these major categories that are protein. We haven't even talked about like traditional meat or anything like that. And protein is just going up and up right now. So it's just it's a very safe place because people continue to want protein.
I know it's interesting because I feel like protein as a whole, and we're speaking as, U.S. citizens, we have the abundance of everything, and we have the abundance of protein. Obviously, globally, some places don't have the same ability to have that. But like, I would argue that the average person probably eats enough of protein. You could argue maybe they should eat more, and they should probably eat less, whatever. That there's a changing dietary preference that's happening right now, and that's driving all of this up overall. And this is probably for another piece of content, but like, just talking about how you play that out long term. And I know we've mentioned a few years ago, probably like, why precision fermentation and things like that in the long term make a ton of sense because of the global protein supply and all those types of things. There's a lot of things going on in the short term because of the capital markets and different things in terms of startups and why maybe they're not performing as well as we thought they were going to perform or whatever that was. But it's just interesting about just the overall consumption of everything protein, like you said, meat, if it's dairy with some of these kind of more premium types of things, and then all the other kind of offshoots of that, just with everything kind of protein added and different elements. Like it just seems like people can't get enough of protein. They just seem like if they could eat only protein and they all become carnivores, maybe that's what the world needs. And watch, somebody's going to clip that and they're going to think that I'm, one of those wackadoos that says you should only be doing the carnivore diet. Shout out to some of my friends that are on that right now. But I like to practice a more balanced approach to things. I don't want to hate on the different
plant-based friends.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I like a little bit of everything. I don't want any of these trade organizations coming after you or I, Scott. I feel like they're going to hunt us down and say that we're haters of these different things. We're not. We like everything. We eat an abundance of things. Scott
We are
and I
not haters. We try to look at this agnostically and what the market says. I do want to point out though that I find that most people you find it interesting because you would think with so many kind of diehards for these different type of diet tribes, from vegan all the way to carnivore and everything in between. A lot of people, say that they became healthier once they followed it. All of these diets, which gets you thinking. But it's really, it's usually that they became more aware of what they're eating, and they're eating, better options in those categories. Because no one really decides to cut out meat and replaces it only with cake. Like they're probably eating more vegetables as well. And the same thing on the flip side, they're probably not just eating bacon cheeseburgers all day. So it's like you're usually making healthier decisions. I know that's a little off topic here. But then I also, to your point, and people are often getting enough protein to not be deficient. That doesn't mean they're at optimal levels. So I know we're trying to be agnostic, but I am a supporter of getting some more protein. But that's especially true of people who are trying to lose weight, which I think takes us into our last part of the conversation. But as you're losing weight, it's even more important to keep your protein high, so you're losing body fat instead of muscle. And with the entrance of the GLP-1 drugs, the quote I used is from the beginning of the year. It's not a quote, it's a survey, but it was something like 8% of people are currently on these drugs, 6% were on them but are off now, and another 9% of Americans say that they plan to take these in the near future. So, quick math there, that's over 20% of people either are taking, have taken, or plan to take these types of medications, many of whom it's for weight loss. Obviously, there's the diabetes element as well. And so undoubtedly, protein is going to have a major impact. People are eating less. People say that they want to take this to lose weight. In reality, that usually means they want to look better. And so to look better, if they're losing an abundance of muscle, I think most would argue that they're not going to look better or as good as they would want. I don't know if I'm allowed to say these things, but I think that the focus on protein for preserving muscle mass is going to be important for them.
Yeah, I think the GLP-1 discussion is extremely interesting. I think that is going to continue to play a role in all of this because, as what you mentioned, I mean, you look at just the overall like overweight obesity, side of things, and how many people over time will have access to this because of insurances and things, maybe adding this to the plan and wherever. The pool of people becomes massive. And really, I think at this point, it's
and they're
not
making pill versions as well.
Yeah, they're going to make it's not going to just be, shots or whatever. And, you just kind of consider, the effects of what that does with your relationship with food and how you think of things. Like it changes everything. I mean, I think that at this point we know a lot more than what we did a few years ago when I think the first, if it was Wegovy or whatever, was approved for weight loss purposes. Now you have a better idea of like how people respond to it, what their habits or consumption behaviors change, a lot of different things there. And there's a lot of opportunities. I think that people now have a good sense of like where they need to be positioned and how they need to think about, marketing communications, but also maybe product development side of things. You're going to see a lot of companies, I think, address that and kind of, tailor their offerings to these individuals because it's going to be a huge group of individuals, especially in the US market. And at that point, it can make or break, substantial brands. I think Nestle already kind of made their move or is making their move with a product line called Vital Pursuit, maybe.
And they also have a site live about products in their portfolio that would help as well, the different. So yeah, this is going to be a part of strategy for I would say most big brands and a lot of little ones as well.
I want to bounce back a little bit because we forgot to talk about one of the major formats, and that is RTD beverages. And I think that one is super interesting to talk about because it's been growing extremely well over the last handful of years, even despite the supply constraints that have happened, just with the overall, demand being way above what, is kind of available because of the way those products need to be processed and just how little, I guess, and costly it is to kind of create those facilities. Now you're seeing a lot of huge investments being put towards that over the last couple of years. A lot of the new facilities from both the major companies and just overall like contract manufacturers, independent ones have kind of come online or are coming online over the next year or so. So you're seeing a lot more people looking at it, not necessarily as like a blue ocean, but they're looking at it and saying, wait, there are, a handful of the same brands that have been up there for a while. If it's on the medical side, there's that side of it that maybe could eventually be a place for disruption, or, the active, wellness side of things that are, again, the same brands that have been there for a while. And you're saying, maybe there's some opportunity for me to take some share here. If I have the availability of line time, maybe it's worth it. And you're starting to see some brands start to trickle out there or spend more time in that area. I also think, what we have mentioned previously with like sports drinks and energy drinks, where there are substantial brands that are getting built with the powders that have a ton of, kind of fans of their brand. They have a ton of community around them. And when they all of a sudden switch over to a new format, it's not like they're going back to zero. They have this baked in group of people that want to buy them because they have some emotional connection with the brand. And it gives them the ability to make those leaps into these like higher barriers to entry kind of categories easier than previously. It used to just be, hey, I don't want to mess around with that because the sales and distribution models maybe are scary to me or whatever. That's kind of all been thrown away because now you're starting to see success over success over success in different similar categories that use similar distribution and retail models. And it's not so scary for these entrepreneurs that maybe came from sports nutrition or wherever. They can take shots into these bigger spaces. They don't have to be scared anymore. And I think you're going to start to see over the next probably year or so, you're going to start to see a lot more brands spend a lot more time in there. And maybe that does, in a way, start the process to, create a little bit more disruption. It's not going to be overnight because Premier Protein and, Coke owned ones like Core Power and Fairlife, and Pepsi owned, Gatorade and or Muscle Milk. Like, they're not going away anytime soon, but it would be nice to see some more involvement by some brands taking a different angle, using some different ideas out there on both just the protein side, but even like some of the meal replacement ones too. I know there's some brands that are already kind of doing some interesting things, but they're not, in the US market at least, they're not fully in it to the place that maybe there are in some of the other European countries or the UK.
And to your point, retailers are interested in this as well, differentiation. And so, using that ready to drink playbook from those other categories, having popular brands that can differentiate their set, at least at first, is very appealing to a lot of retailers. And you see some other brands coming up. To your point, a lot of the other ones aren't going anywhere. But there is opportunity for a lot of brands to, if not like cause major disruption, really make an impact and innovate on them. This is another one. You see plant proteins are having more success than they used to. The formulation, the technology there has come a long way. I never know how to say the brand, so I don't want to say, but you saw Owen?
Owen, yeah. Only what you need, yeah.
I know what it stands for. I never know if I'm saying it right. But you saw recently, there big news with them as well. And so, coming out, that's just, one example of a brand that really came up over the past, it's probably 10 years. They've probably been around for a little bit now, right?
Yeah, I think maybe it was 17, 18, maybe, I think. So probably like 6. Yeah, so they're
not that long.
Yeah, not that long.
And they've really, made a name for themselves. So it's not impossible in the set, even though it's dominated by a lot of new players. Established players. And I did want to just pull up the data. That's why if you saw me looking off screen here. But this, the ready to drink protein meal replacements is up almost 13% year over year right now in store. And this is a category I do want to mention that historically does much better in brick and mortar than online. Whether that's because of the ship, the weight for shipping. Also, this does really well in convenience format. People, again, on the go nutrition. If you don't want a bar, shake is the next big option, which does, because a lot of these are consumed, the single ones, they need to be cold. That does impact some of the ability to get shelf space a little more than some of those shelf stable, like protein powder, for example. But ready to drink, it's going well. And actually, I'm surprised the price increase year over year is just around 2%. So for a protein category to kind of stay that level, shows to that's going to be, it's not going to be out of range for people. It actually might get more economical as a lot of the price increases for a lot of the other protein categories has really gone up by more than that.
You briefly mentioned kind of just the lack of flexibility with merchandising of some of these, and it kind of brought up a point that I had been kind of thinking through. And a lot of these things that we're talking about are like high protein. They're not just like kind of added protein, but because of just the overall feeling of protein in the consumer's mind now and them trying to search that out more, I think the spread between these products become less. So what I'm interested to see is some of these different large retailers start to merchandise the products in a more dynamic way, or in a, maybe multiple way, because a lot of these products are still stuck in like the pharmacy, healthy living kind of sections. And I'd love for them to kind of spread out and be closer to categories in which people could make swaps, healthier or functional swaps. So, in the candy section, why not have some of these products that are, arguably candy bars that have protein, or, if it's different drinks, or like they have the ability to be in different spaces. I think it's just that there has been a traditional or historical kind of like, shadow. You put them in this like area, and that's not the best spot.
I didn't realize they were there as I'm looking for my antacids.
Yeah.
And yeah.
But that's not the best place probably for them anymore. Like that was maybe arguably the best place for them, but not anymore. I feel like a lot of these categories, they probably fit better with what just the conventional items are. And maybe because you could argue that some of the more traditional names that decided to create a variant with added protein, maybe it went from a category that went from 2 grams of protein to 6 or 7, like they get to be merchandised in the same set as their typical product.
Yep.
But then the one that maybe has 16 grams or something that's like a higher protein one, they get to be stuck in the pharmacy section where people maybe aren't even looking for those products, or maybe they don't even shop in that section. It would be interesting if they start to merchandise those things in a more dynamic way. And I would argue that it's going to happen because as these products, like health and wellness as a whole, becomes just common and just, like something that is really arguably like an autopilot decision at that point, like the consumer is not going to like search those things out anymore. They're going to want those products to just be natural, integrated into their typical kind of areas that they're purchasing.
And why not both? Collagen does, one of the reasons, circling all the way back to collagen, is because it's merchandise often both in the protein powder section as well as like the beauty section,
Yeah.
and the cosmetic section. And so, retailers, I think, would benefit from a wider merchandising variability on it. And then, if you're a brand and you're only in the, what you call the pharmacy section, to your point, the other brands that are like newer or they have just a higher protein version, they're not going to be there. And so consumers have less reason, again, unless they're going for their antacids, to be searching around for there. So they're going to get everything that they need just from the normal grocery store aisle. And so from a brand perspective, I think that's important, as well as from retailers really capitalizing the most on the category.
And before I let you go, I want to think maybe into the future. I know we always kind of lean forward on a lot of the things we're talking about, but I want to think about some patterns in some of the other categories, especially energy and I think sports drinks and a number of these ones. There was the original disruption that maybe happened with, maybe it's like sweeteners or flavors or whatever, and then you had those, arguably something else was added into there or whatever, but like there was levels to that, how that happened. And I think that we have protein, which is obviously like there's a nutritional benefit to it, and I think people love that. And then do we think there's going to be like the protein plus? Like, is that going to be a thing across all of these formats? Is functional mushrooms with protein in a bar, does that make sense? Is there going to be some element of the protein shake is something more complete from a nutritional profile of like vitamins, minerals, and greens or something like that? Like, do we see that being the next iteration on some of these things? Is that something that in the future people are going to go, oh, protein this or that is boring, I want protein plus?
I think that the plus is, in this case, a serious nice to have. But I don't think like any of those things you mentioned will be a reason for people to leave a protein bar or a protein shake. But I think what you're asking is, now that we have protein in all these things, is the added mushroom or whatever it is, you can make the argument that there's already success on that with all these bars that are high fiber as well. So those are kind of, and those, a lot of times they do that to for the nutrition facts panel side of things, and net carbs and everything. So that's one of the areas where you already see its success. I find that with, and I know I said this before, but like, I don't think everything can have ashwagandha in it. And I like ashwagandha, I like some of these mushrooms. I think like, there's times when I'm a consumer of both of them, but like not everything can have them in there. And so, yes, there's some people who will look at it, they've heard about some of these things, and I don't mean to pick on those two ingredients, but they're just very popular, and so that's why. But oftentimes in here, when they're in like a bar or a shake like that, you don't know how much of things are in there. It's harder to play with it. So I think that, as far as like the primary driver is always going to be the protein. You might get some people say, oh, oh, this also has this. I might try it. But I don't foresee it being like a staple of the next generation of protein shakes or bars, uh, rather than a nice to have in certain situations.
Yeah, I think it maybe evolves or somehow converges with what we mentioned with like GLP-1 and the other nutrient gaps that naturally come up.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just around the formulation of those products. And maybe that's just for a certain set of people. And maybe that's
And
sizable enough for it
that's
to
out there
be.
as like the meal replacement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than the
Yeah.
protein.
Yeah. So I think it'll be interesting to see kind of where that plays out and if it's something that evolves in that direction or not. I think right now people are just trying to gobble up as much protein as they can. But Scott, appreciate all the time. I think we covered this up, right down, side by side. We did all the things that we could. But I enjoyed the conversation.
Always a pleasure, Josh.
I hope you enjoyed this YouTube video. If you did, consider hitting that like button to support me. Also help me get to my new short-term goal of 4,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. I'd love to see you join me on this journey, but we need to fix the fact that I think slightly over 90% of you that are watching this YouTube video right now are not subscribed to my YouTube channel, and that makes me extremely sad. But I do want to thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.